Hello and welcome back to Comparative Anatomy. Today what we want to talk about is the idea of the egg versus the placenta, right? What does that mean? Who does what? And what are the benefits, the pros and the cons? Now we've talked a little bit about external and internal fertilization, especially when we were talking about the sharks in terms of their pioneering and what are the benefits of internal fertilization and what are the benefits of external fertilization and why they're both successful. But here's the thing about land animals. In order to have young on land, they need to be protected. And the types of eggs that you see in fish and amphibians are not the kinds of eggs that are going to be able to survive on land. So we want to talk about some of these terrestrial strategies for having offspring. Just as a little bit of a reminder, we talked about vertebrate reproductive systems. There were a couple of things that were important, and one, they all have the uterus, okay? But when we talked about the non-mammalian vertebrates and some birds and snakes, we found out that they really have either the uterus is divided into two chambers or it actually is completely two chambers. Mammals, birds, and some snakes really only have one uterus, and so there's a big difference. And then all of the non-mammals, so fish, amphibians, reptiles, birds, dinosaurs, they all have one opening that is kind of entrance and exit, depending on what you're talking about, and that's the cloaca. Whereas in mammals, there are different exits for different things, right? And so there are actually three openings. Okay. Oh, by the way, just as an aside, this is the tree of life for vertebrates, and one of the things that you can see here is, okay, so how are they related? And as you start looking at these different strategies, you can see that the organisms that are using these strategies arise from this guy right here. So all of these guys who are terrestrial, who live away from water, arise from this common ancestor here. And so there's got to be something in this guy that allowed all of these guys to move on to land, right? Because all of these guys either live in permanently or near water, or one of their life phases is in the water. Okay, so we talk about reproductive patterns. There are three big types. There are the oviparous animals, they lay eggs. There are the ovoviviparous animals, and they don't lay eggs, they have eggs, but they keep them inside, like the dogfish shark that we were looking at. They're ovoviviparous. So the nourishment comes from the egg, the yolk, right? But they're not attached to the mother, they're just inside the mother, and that's super duper because it allows them to be protected, whereas just eggs that are externally developing, they have to rely on the egg shell to protect them, and hopefully they're well hidden, because everybody loves eggs. Now, viviparous, this is where the eggs don't have a shell or a membrane that separates them. They're actually connected to the mother in some way, okay? And that will be something that we'll talk about what are the different ways that you can do that. Okay, so when we talk about oviparous versus viviparous, and some of these things are ovoviviparous, but we're not focusing on that in this particular chart, because really what we're looking at is eggs versus not eggs, yeah, and so there are a couple of egg-laying mammals, almost all of them are live bearers, viviparous. Birds, they lay eggs. Reptiles, they lay eggs. Now these guys right here are actually ovoviviparous, okay? Amphibians, they're going to be oviparous. These guys are ovoviviparous, okay? Fish, they are either oviparous or ovoviviparous. Now this just here means live bearers, but these guys are in this category from reptiles, amphibians, and fish. They are all going to be ovoviviparous. The only ones that are viviparous in this chart truly are going to be the mammals. Okay, now here's the great thing that happens. In that common ancestor that we were talking about, the amniotic egg develops. And so the organisms with this adaptation are called the amniotes. And so we are part of that amniote branch. Basically what this says is that you have a fluid-filled sac that is contained within a shell or within a uterus. Now, amphibians and fish have membranes that enclose the offspring, but they're not shells, right? And they certainly aren't the uterus, which we'll come to later. The big deal about this is the one thing, besides lungs, lungs would be really important. This is the one thing that allows embryos to develop away from the water. And so this is what gives you terrestrial organisms, okay? And it's the evolution of these shelled amniotic eggs that actually make internal fertilization a requirement, because you have to get the gametes together before the shell develops, okay? Because the sperm's not going to go through that and all this good stuff. So internal fertilization is a requirement of living on land anyway, because you can't just release all of these eggs and sperm on dry land, because where are they going to go? But then also you've got to get them together before you have any of. When we did our embryo origami and we folded through gastrulation and neurulation so we could form this early embryo, you can see that this is the same thing. And so hopefully you'll start thinking about that embryo origami that we did. So here you can see, here's the mesoderm, right? This is going to be ectoderm. Here's going to be the endoderm. And this, of course, is the yolk. And the yolk sac is the membrane that holds the yolk. The allantois here is one of the membranes we're going to be talking about. The amnion is one of the membranes that we're talking about. This is the one that actually contains the embryo itself. And then the chorion is the one that surrounds the whole thing. So these are the 4 extra embryonic membranes that arise from those 3 germ layers that we were manipulating, but that arise during gastrulation. Okay, now let's talk about the amnion first. The amnion is just this sac that really protects the embryo from shock, but it also keeps it from drying out. It's the source of the amniotic fluid, and you can see there's a sac here surrounding. You can especially see it really well. You can see the blood vessels that are actually running through the sac, because remember, it's cells. It has to be nourished, and it has to have waste products taken away. Here is the amnion around here surrounding this little embryo here, which happens to be a chicken. And you can see there's this beautiful vascularization that's surrounding the yolk sac and, of course, the amnion as well. And then here's just the diagram again. Okay, the yolk sac is what stores the yolk, the nutrients, and the yolk sac actually predates the amniotes by several million years, okay? And so this is not something that is unique to the amniotes, because everybody who's got eggs has it. Now, for the reptiles and birds, the yolk sac expands over the surface of the yolk, and the cells digest the yolk, and then the blood vessels within that yolk sac are going to carry it to the embryo, okay? Now, in mammals, the yolk sac doesn't contain yolk. It does stockpile the nutrients that were stored in the egg, and then it's going to transport those nutrients until the placenta forms. And once the placenta forms, it's going to take over providing nutrients, okay? And so there's no yolk. And actually, it says transports nutrients from the yolk. There isn't actually any yolk. It's just this stockpile of nutrients, so make sure you understand that. And then the other thing, too, is that the yolk sac is going to be the source of all of the stem cells that give rise to the lymph and the blood. Okay, now the allantois is going to be a metabolic waste storage sac in reptiles and birds. So it deals with metabolic waste. It's going to store it for reptiles and birds. The other thing that it's going to do is it is going to combine with the chorion, which we'll talk about in a minute, and it's going to fuse with that and form this respiratory surface, allowing the diffusion of gases in and out of the egg. And so the gas coming in, of course, is oxygen. The gas going out is the waste product of respiration, which is carbon dioxide. Now, mammals, the allantois is going to be within the umbilical cord. It doesn't store waste, but it does form the blood vessels that are going to transport the oxygen and the nutrients from the placenta to the embryo, and then it's going to take the carbon dioxide from respiration and the nitrogenous waste from cellular metabolism, and it's going to take those, and then those will be dealt with by the mother. Okay, the chorion lies just beneath the eggshell, and it surrounds the embryo completely. All the other membranes, everything is inside the chorion, okay? And then in reptiles and birds, like I said, it's going to allow the diffusion of gases. For mammals, it's actually going to form most of the placenta, and so it'll surround the embryo and form the placenta as well. Okay. Now, as the embryo grows, obviously the need for oxygen increases, but the great thing about the chorion is that it gets bigger as well, and so you get more surface area, and that's pretty fun. Okay, this, by the way, is the actual placenta, and so the chorion forms a lot of this. This is a human placenta, by the way. Okay, so when you do some comparison, you can see that the chorion is pretty much the same in both of them, except here is the placenta. So it's the fetal portion of the placenta. The maternal portion of the placenta is in the uterine lining. Okay, the amnion is surrounding the embryo, and it's bigger in the mammal. Here you have the yolk, and then here you have just really amnion, and inside here is the amniotic fluid. There's the amniotic fluid. Then the allantois, you can see, is its own sac, and then here it's actually in the umbilical cord, and then the yolk sac right here in the umbilical cord, and then here all by itself. Okay, and then this is just some nicer diagrams so you can see the difference between the two. And remember, this is going to get used up, and you're going to be attached to the placenta here. This is going to get used up, and then this little guy will be born. Okay, now, mammals are the only ones that are truly viviparous. And most mammal embryos do not develop within an eggshell. They develop within the mother's body in some way, and most are retained in the mother's body, right, for the most part. Now, monotremes are the exception. Monotremes are your platypus and echidna, okay? And these guys are the primitive mammals. These are some of the first mammals to evolve. They still lay eggs like birds, and they have these big yolky eggs. Well, actually, they're not very big, but they're yolky. They have large yolk inside of it. The egg itself is not particularly very big. But they do resemble bird eggs. And the one thing that makes mammals, like the really big thing that all mammals do, is lactate. They produce milk. And the monotremes don't have mammary glands the way that the other mammals do. And so they actually excrete milk through their fur, and then the babies lick it out of their fur. So they kind of, for all practical purposes, sweat milk. Okay, it's not really sweat though, it's milk. Now, moving on, the next guys are going to be the marsupials. And in this case, the marsupial offspring is fertilized internally. It doesn't have a shell. It develops, but at a very, very early stage in development. And you can see this is a little guy. This little guy will climb out of the pouch, and it will actually, or will be born. It'll come out of the birth canal, and then it will climb up through the fur and then go into the pouch where it latches onto a teat. And you can see that this little guy here has latched onto this nipple and is going to stay there until it develops. So you can see this little kangaroo. He's very cute. Okay, but they're really, really underdeveloped, and you can see they can't open their eyes. They don't have any fur. So this is a huge and dangerous journey that these little guys take along the mother's pouch, and some of them don't make it, but the ones that do will then spend the rest of their time in the pouch, and then eventually they'll become joeys who can come out of the pouch and get back in the pouch, come back out of the pouch. Side note, kangaroos are actually really cool because they can hold a fertilized egg in stasis while they have one of these little guys attached to a teat while they still have a joey. So they can actually have 3 offspring at different developmental phases at any given time. And that fertilized egg that they're holding in stasis, it'll just pause in development. They can actually hold that there for 7 years, and then it'll continue to develop. So you could have an egg that's fertilized, but actually is born over 7 years later because it just sits there until the hormones in the kangaroo trigger its development. This is really useful for times of low resources or drought or things like that. Okay, now most mammals, 94% or so of mammals, are placental mammals, and this means that they have this placenta which is attached to the mother and to the embryo and is the facilitator of that connection between mother and baby. And so the evolution of the placenta actually required these extra embryonic membranes to to be reconstructed, okay? And there's a modification of the oviduct so that you get this expanded region that forms this muscular uterus that will allow the offspring to be pushed out through the birth canal, the vaginal opening. Okay, now the placenta is the site of everything that happens, but the other thing that it does is it secretes the hormones that keep the pregnancy going, okay? It develops from the chorion, right, and the maternal uterine tissue. You can see that they kind of fuse together here. There are villi on both sides, and they attach to each other. And then the umbilical cord itself has 2 arteries and 1 vein coming through it. You can see here are the arteries, and when we look at the fetal pig, we're actually going to see these veins and arteries. It's quite cool, but there's that single vein at the center, and then the arteries are wrapped around, and this, of course, is the umbilical cord that we've been talking about. And then this is what it looks like when you have a human baby, right? So here's the umbilical cord, and then the placenta is going to be up here, right? And so here you have the amniotic sac, and then surrounding all of this is going to be the chorion, okay? So there is a human baby. Now, the interesting thing about this relationship, sort of a byproduct, is that, well, and also because mammals are born not as well developed. They are, in fact, babies. But one of the great things that occurs with this is this bond and this caregiving between mother and offspring. And you can see that mammals have very complex maternal relationships, and there is clearly this connection that is just deeper than must make this baby survive, right? And so there's a caring nature to these relationships, and just here are some pictures of various relationships that you can see there. And anyway, so exciting things about eggs, placenta, amniotes, reptiles, birds, mammals, living on land, good stuff there. And then this is just for fun. All right, thank you very much. Please ask questions next time I see you if you have them, and thanks for listening.